Welcome back to Science Corner. I'm here with Thomas DeLauer. Thomas is a leading nutrition and performance coach known for his expertise in fitness, metabolic health, and body optimization. He teaches science-backed training, intermittent fasting, and ketogenic strategies. A former 300-pound corporate executive, Thomas, he transformed his own health and became a prominent voice in high-performance nutrition. Today, he helps athletes and executives optimize longevity, recovery, and sustained energy through personalized, research-driven guidance. Thomas, welcome to Science Corner.
Hey, what's up, Jordan?
So we're getting into this January time. People are looking to reset. We're talking about this new year, new you concept. You've worked with executives, athletes, everyday people. When people approach January as this clean slate, what's the most common misconception that they tend to have about what actually drives consistent change?
I'd say the first thing is that, the clock resets at, January 1st, or the clock resets at midnight, right? And I think that there's the biggest misconception is like a twist of the word consistency. I think people think that discipline and consistency just means like every single day, or means like, when you look at true sustainability and consistency, it's not about being so regimented to do it every single day, or to have this like program that's rinse and repeat every single day, the same time every day. I like to say that that's more habit than that is, a particular like methodology to make a change, right? The habit comes later, right? It becomes, I'll explain it a slightly different way, because I know it's a simple question, but it's a lot deeper than just answering it basically. If you take someone that's a really experienced athlete, you might look at them and you might say, you're really disciplined. You hit the gym every single day. Dude, the reality is that's not discipline at that point for that person. That's really more habit. It would almost be harder for that person to not go, right? So it's not really, discipline is when you're actually having to really consciously be aware of this thing, right? So I think sometimes we take advice from the people that have made a habit out of it, when in reality, you have to embrace the fact that it is hard and stop trying to create a story for yourself that tries to make it easier. Like, it's okay to make space for the fact that this is a change and discipline is hard, and that's okay. And you're not going to make it every day. And if you set expectations right at the beginning, then you're not going to have this major dopamine crash at the end of January, because you're feeling good, you're on cloud nine, you've been hitting it consistently, and then bam, your kid gets sick and you can't go to the gym one Friday, and all of a sudden you're derailed. But if you set expectations, you just be like, you know what? I'm going to consistently go to the gym. I don't know what that looks like. Maybe it's 5 days a week, maybe it's 3, but I'm just going to consistently go, and I'm going to have that discipline.
Got it. I love that discipline versus habit kind of connection. I think there's the transition point as you get to that, and it becomes more consistent.
Agreed.
So your personal transformation from a 300-pound corporate executive lifestyle, it's well known. How does that experience influence the way that you approach a new year reset with your own clients?
It's a good question. I feel like, for me, a lot of times, the end of the fiscal year was earlier, right? So it's my stress would always come. You'd have this October surge of stress, and then you'd go right into the holidays. So it was always from October to January, everything went to crap. Everything, that's when I would put on the most weight. That's when I would be the most stressed. That's when I would miss the most workouts. So January was this proverbial, okay, it is time to go. And I see that a lot in any kind of corporate setting or just high performance thing. And again, it's about maintaining that intensity. And what I mean by that is, if you look at, I'll use CrossFit as an example, just randomly. It's not glorifying it or bashing it. It's just a concept. Their entire modality behind how they set up their types of training and their intervals is to quote unquote maintain intensity, right? So they'll do things like descending ladders. And what I mean by that is they'll start with something that's a really high intensity for a longer duration. Then the next interval will be slightly less duration. The goal is to maintain that intensity. The reason that works really well with high performance people, if you give them that mindset, they do really well, because people that are wired like that, they tend to be really good at going balls to the wall, going all the way. And if you again set expectations and you say okay, maybe your workouts are a little bit shorter, maybe it needs to be looking like this, maybe you need to, the goal is maintaining that intensity and throttling your volume, throttling your duration. what that does, in my opinion, to people that are like-minded is it takes this like endurance component out of it, and it allows them to come into the present and just focus on that intensity. So I found with people that are wired like that, you have to frame it like that. Be like, what can you do in 20 minutes to maintain intensity? Something that you don't have to think about, an hour out of your entire day when you're busy, right? So when it comes to January, it's like, this is a time for you to reformat how you look at that, because everything kind of gets foggy and messy towards the end of the year, and we lose track of that. So how can you periodize and program so that you're taking the least amount of time out of your day? And then anything that you get on top of that, longer workouts, is just a bonus, right? Like setting the expectations and setting the bar at an appropriate level for you to maintain that intensity.
Got it. And so you probably end up with a lot of these types of people who have maybe trained in the past, and maybe they're coming back to training after a long time away. What signals should they pay attention to first? So when we think about strength, conditioning, recovery, energy, so how hard should they push? What should they be paying attention to, trying to avoid energy, things like that?
Yeah, 100% pay attention to not necessarily your sleep in terms of like, how do you sleep better, but pay attention to your sleep as a barometer for how hard you're pushing it, right? That's the first thing. That's your first indicator that maybe you're pushing it too hard or your load is too high, right? That's the first thing to take a hit. So you start noticing, well, I'm like waking up lots of times in the middle of the night and nothing's really changed other than the fact that I'm training more or I'm eating less because I'm dieting, right? So you have this adrenaline surge that's kind of happening. You dysregulated cortisol rhythms and all kinds of stuff. So that's the first thing, and probably the most important thing, because most people aren't really in a state of true overtraining unless you're like a real, like very elite athlete. Like overtraining is a term that's thrown around a lot, but we do have that total just real life load, right? You've got family, you've got everything that's coming back after the Christmas holidays, back at work. Then you're also trying to start a new, like, you got to think about that whole like load that's coming on. And again, the first thing that takes a hit is usually your sleep, because that's just a perfect barometer for things. So I say pay close attention to that. And the moment that that sleep starts to degrade, you need to know where you need to back off of some things, right? Like really listen to your body, because these like type A personalities, I get it. Like you want to just almost like sympathetically overdrive everything. And it's the hardest damn thing in the world to like take a step back and like actually listen to your body, not like what the weird little voice in your head is telling you to do, but actually listen to your body for a second.
And that's really interesting. So I want to stick on this concept of sleep for a second. We have wearables, we have smart beds, we have all these things, but then we have like our intuition of how we're actually feeling. Do you have a perspective on where people should be listening? Should we be very metric driven? Should we be listening to ourselves? Like, where does that kind of fall out in this world of wearables?
I have a weird opinion on wearables, quite frankly, because I've done a lot of tests where I'll wear like my Garmin, my Whoop, and Aura, even like a Muse, and I will monitor, and I'll get wildly different results between all of them, with some common denominators. Like some common, HRV is usually very, the thing is again, some of this is just my opinion. Like I think HRV is a tremendous metric, but it still leaves a lot to be desired, because there's wide variance between people, depending on epigenetics, depending on training experience, between all kinds of things. So I think they're important for a little bit of a guardrail. Like, I mean, it's definitely going to tell you, like, I mean, there's no doubt about it. Like if I'm sick with the flu, I'm going to have a recovery score of like 5, right? Like there's no doubt about it. Like these things are accurate to a degree. But I think obsessing with optimization is also problematic. And where we run into an issue is that we are always, again, we're trying to like prefrontal cortex our way through everything, instead of just actually doing the opposite and maybe turning that part of the brain off for a second and just saying like, what's my nervous system telling me? Like, can I not sit down with the family without feeling like I need to like get up and do something else, because your nervous system's just like clicked on all the time. So it's like the wearables are great for confirmation, but they shouldn't be like the proof, if that makes sense.
Got it. I think that's a great perspective. So let's talk about metabolic flexibility. This is the core theme in your work. And so as we're looking at this new year, taking on new routines, things like that, what practical steps can people take in these first few weeks of the year to really improve metabolic health, but without overcomplicating it, kind of building on that theme of sleep that we just talked about?
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, metabolic flexibility, just to kind of lean into that for a second, that's really just optimal mitochondrial like substrate utilization, which just means the ability for your cells to use the appropriate fuels when appropriately necessary, right? Like if you're insulin resistant, you have a really hard time like utilizing carbohydrates properly, and you end up really in stressful states a lot. And then beta oxidation or fat utilization can become impaired as well. So metabolic flexibility is just like, okay, my body should be using fats when it should be using fats, and it's using carbs when it should be using carbs, plain and simple. The best way to improve that is just to train those energy systems appropriately, right? Like, so if you look at elite athletes, they have a lot of metabolic flexibility. Why? Because they're training in those zones a lot, right? They'll train in those fat oxidation zones, those low intensity zones, and they'll train in those high intensity zones. The problem is that regular everyday people don't usually put the hours in to achieve that. So we need a little bit of help nutritionally to do that too. So the way that I look at it is you should probably do a little bit of both. Low intensity workouts, maybe in a fasted state here and there. Doesn't mean that it's going to make you perform better or worse. It's just saying like, hey, let's do this now and then to capitalize on fat oxidation. And then you should also train occasionally in a fed state with carbohydrates on board, so that you maintain what's called glucose tolerance, and your cells are efficient at using glucose too, because it's really as simple as if you don't use it, you lose it. The body's just going to be very efficient at what you consistently do, right? There's no room for all this extra nonsense as far as the body's concerned. So, for me, for years and years and years, I was like adamant about fasted training. And quite frankly, I think for staying lean, it's tremendous. But I would notice that if I would have like honey or carbs before a workout, I would actually bonk. I wasn't performing well, because I was so used to training fasted. So that's when I would actually load with carbs, my body would be like, I actually don't know how to use this. And my glucose would just spike. And it was a simple explanation of like that lever, that mitochondrial machinery hadn't really been conditioned, because it's so used to like being able to pull from existing substrates. So the simplest thing that I would say for people is, if there's something new you want to try, it's like, hey, try going like 3 days a week or 2 days a week of fasted training, even if your performance declines when you do it, and 2 or 3 days a week of fed training, like with carbs deliberately on board. So I encourage whoever is doing what to dip their toe in the water to the other side, because you've got the carb fed athletes, you've got the fasted athletes, and both sides, quite frankly, are a little bit afraid to try the other side. So it's like, why don't we just meet in the middle and try it out? Because it's going to be hard either way, because one's what you're accustomed to. And I found that has just made me so much more resilient and less freaked out, with less of like an encumbrance to my workouts, because there would be times when like I wouldn't be able to work out until the afternoon, and then I would just skip it because I'm like, oh, I already ate, I feel like crap, Now that's not the case. Now I can train in the afternoon, no problem.
Got it. So this is great. So I have a big issue with fasted training. I only do fasted training. I never ever eat before I train. So I'm going to take this to the bank, and I'm going to incorporate this. This is going to be my new year, new you, is trying to do some fed training. But staying on this concept of like intermittent fasting, this is often used as a reset tool. So how should people adjust their fasting strategies when it comes to like increasing exercise volumes or training demands increase, things like that?
Yeah, at the time that we're recording this, I just filmed a video, I think 2 days ago, on a really interesting study, was looking at 12-hour fasting versus 24-hour fasting versus 36 versus 72, and its effect on really a number of different things, but mainly metabolic rate, so our RMR, which was really fascinating. So, and I'm going to get to a point, I'm a little long-winded sometimes with this stuff, but they found is like up to 36 hours, like during the fast, there was actually an increase in RMR, which was actually a surprise to me. And it had to do with just norepinephrine, and just increases in norepinephrine. And then after 36 hours, it started to decline. And by 72 hours, it was pretty darn low. So the metabolic rate started to decrease. So first things first, seems like 24 to 36 hours is like a really good sweet spot if people want to start experimenting with like every now and then doing a longer fast. And then what they kind of found is that doing 16-hour fasts repeatedly was starting to have the same effect as like when you start getting up into 60, 72-hour like fast. So there was 16-hour fast back to back to back to back had the same effect on metabolic slowdown as doing like a 72-hour fast. So not to say that doing that is bad, but what it is saying is that it's much better to do a 16 to 20-hour fast every other day or every 3 days, and let it be the anomaly, let it be sort of the shock to the system rather than the new established baseline. Because 10 years ago when I was making content on fasting, all the rage was doing like daily 16-8 and maybe taking the weekends off. Now it's pretty strong evidence that when you do that daily, it's really no different than just chronic caloric restriction at that point. So what I would recommend is maybe 2 days in a row tops before you take a day off. So like, what I'll do is I'll do 16-8, or I do more like 18-6, 18-6, 18-hour fast, 6-hour eating window, maybe 2 days in a row. And then I'll like take 2 days off and just increase my calories those 2 days. And I pay attention to my calories over the course of a week rather than daily, right? So, because I think if you try to meet your caloric needs every day, even in a short window, sometimes that can just be really stressful. It's just like, look at it over the course of the week. If you have 1,000 calories one day and 4,000 calories the next day, I mean, that's fine. Just what are you washing out at the end of the week?
Got it. No, that's super helpful. So I want to pivot to supplements a little bit. Supplements often get treated as, let's call them shortcuts in January. So when you're working with your clients, how do you frame supplementation as a support tool, or exactly that, a supplement, rather than a replacement for training or nutrition fundamentals?
I mean, first off, I get them excited about using them as tools, right? So I think the name supplement sometimes is confusing because it almost feels as though it's something you do need to take daily all the time, right? Like I'm supplementing my diet with this. And on one hand, it's appropriate because you're not getting it from the diet, you're supplementing it, but it also implies like this is supplemental and it should be used every day. I really kind of use the phrase of like intermittent supplementation, and it's okay to, and sometimes I get a bad rap for this on YouTube because I'll talk about dozens of different supplements. It doesn't mean that I'm taking them all at once. It means I have practical use cases for those. But I find, again, with my clientele and the type of audience that I have and client base that I work with, they're all about fine tuning and specific use cases. Like what I use for jet lag would be totally different than what I would use if I'm like home and I'm trying to like calm down or decompress, or if I'm in a fat loss phase versus a muscle building phase, like radically different supplementation. And you kind of have to get excited about it. So that's really the first thing that I do is I'm like, hey, like this is not something that's going to be in your life forever. This is something that we can use for this specific use case. And I think that there's a lot of garbage supplements out there too, right? There's a lot of things that the industry is highly unregulated and it's the Wild West, and you got a lot of bad actors out there. So I try to educate people on, okay, there's a right way to do things and there's sort of a naive way of doing things. And this is where I can be a little bit problematic, is I do get hung up on mechanisms sometimes, but you also have to remember that when you're looking at supplement cohorts, like sometimes you don't have the large bodies of evidence, like to say we have 10 RCTs or meta-analyses on this particular supplement. But when you look at the mechanisms, you're like, okay, this has serious merit. This is cool. And the risk profile is really low. So it's probably worth trying, right? So there's certain things like, I think like spermidine is a really good example. Like there's really strong evidence with spermidine for like autophagy, fasting, mimicking effects, but we just haven't gotten to heavy human trials yet. But there's really no downside to it. So it's like, well, it's one of those things where it's like potential upside. Same with like urolithin A, right? Like there's all these things that the upside is potentially huge with pretty much no downside. We may only have like, Timeline, with like brands like Timeline, brands like some of these other ones, like we have a lot of clinicals, but like we're still waiting on more evidence to come out. Then you have things like creatine where we have tons of evidence, right? So, but if you go back in the 90s, like people looked at creatine, and if you were taking creatine, it was like you were taking a steroid, right? Because this is fringe, what's it going to do? So you have to be able to be okay with some mechanistic literature and like testing things on yourself if you're a biohacker, as long as the risk profile is okay. Again, I know that's long-winded, but I think it's okay to like get excited and test these things out as long as you're not making these crazy claims.
No, I love that. And so speaking of supplements, like you actually have a number of your own protocols on SuppCo. And so one of them is your pre-workout protocol. And so we're talking about like, there's some bad actors in the industry, there's all kinds of things going on. What ingredients or principles matter most in a pre-workout? And what marketing features should people kind of like bulk away from?
Yeah. I mean, pre-workouts, I think it's probably important for people to know that most of the time, like what's giving you the main benefit of a pre-workout is pretty much caffeine. So just be aware of that. That's not bad. Caffeine is the most studied ergogenic aid that's out there. It's amazing. Caffeine is amazing. So like, it's nothing wrong with it. It's just be real. Like sometimes the pre-workout that's hitting you harder just has more caffeine in it, right? You'll be very cautious of ones that are making these crazy thermogenic claims. That's the ones that I'm, let's pretend like thermogenic is meaning it's increasing your body heat and ultimately creating more fat loss via that route. That's a big pre-workout claim. Even if they were making the thermogenic gains that they claim they're making, the effect of thermogenesis on fat loss is like 0.5% to 1% anyway. So it's like, even if there was a 500% increase in thermogenesis, you're looking at it's negligible. You're going to get more out of it by just staying fasted for 15 minutes longer, right? So point is like, don't pay attention to that. And also, there's a few other ingredients that are usually pretty prevalent. You have things like, citrulline, you have things like beta-alanine, which are both phenomenal ingredients, but just know that those are really like the staples, right? You've got taurine, you've got caffeine, you've got beta-alanine, citrulline. That's really the primary components of most pre-workouts these days. And then there's all these other like ancillary things. There used to be like DMAA and all these like other things that just focusing agents. You might see rhodiola. So I don't want to make it sound like they're all kind of the same, but a lot of them are really, really similar. And then there's a few ones that are outliers. So just look at ingredient profiles and look at filler ingredients. How much of them are adding a bunch of acesulfame, potassium, and aspartame. Is that something you really want? Not the end of the world, but I'd say probably like 90% of them out there are sweetened with like either sucralose, acesulfame, or aspartame. So you just have to be aware. Is this something that I'm okay with? I have a number of stacks that I recommend through SuppCo, and I actually end up just almost building my own pre-workout stack, right? So like I will individually select different ingredients. Like I really like beta-alanine, so I have no problem going upwards of 5-6 grams of beta-alanine. I like the tingling effect. I like the buffering. So I might do like 50 milligrams of caffeine or have just coffee and then add beta-alanine, add citrulline. So I encourage people to not just trust what's in a pre-workout. You're totally game to be able to make your own and just have some fun with it.
Nice. I love that. I love that kind of like experimentation piece as well. And so one of the other on the back side of the pre-workout and the training side is the recovery side. And recovery gets overlooked early in the year. I think as people are going hard, they're going fast, they forget about this recovery piece. What recovery strategies or supplements provide the biggest kind of bang for your buck for people that are entering this January period and looking to increase that training frequency?
Yeah. Recently, I kind of mess around with a few other ones. There's one that's been kind of interesting. I don't even know if I put this, in my stack, but nicotinol GABA. That's like a niacin-bound GABA. Actually, really seems to have an effect on me. So, like GABA supplements largely do not really cross the blood-brain barrier well. There's some dodgy research that shows that they do, but I'm pretty convinced they don't. But if it's bound to niacin, it can definitely has about a 20% cross. So it's better, right? So you can get a little bit of that parasympathetic tone. So for me, for recovery, and I think that I'm probably right in assuming that most people feel this way too, the hardest part is turning off. Once you're training hard, once you're doing all the right things, it's hard to get out of that mode and switch from sympathetic over to parasympathetic. So, I'm a big fan of kind of playing around with the GABA system, the GABAergic system. I like some use cases of kava. Like kava is pretty interesting in that because that has an effect. It's just not something you want to take all the time. So any way that I can downregulate, but magnesium is obviously a staple for that. But most people have heard that. Glycine actually acts as a neurotransmitter itself. I've been extremely bullish on glycine lately. Like I've been making insidious amounts of content on it, probably driving people crazy just because so much evidence on glycine because it acts as a neurotransmitter. So it has almost GABAergic effects. So when it comes to helping you relax and helping you sleep, these are things that are paving the way for your body to get into that zone without sedating you. Okay. Like you think about, for an example, anyone could go like pop a benzodiazepam and make themselves relax. That's not exactly the best thing to do, right? That's terrible. So you're going to saturate your GABAergic system. You're going to create a crazy rebound. You want to give your body the tools that it needs to support that GABA. Another thing that's really interesting, glutamine has been a big agent for me. I learned about this from Dr. Scott Schur, actually, because I was kind of bearish on glutamine for a while because some of the cancer research. But if you look at that, that's not the most accurate thing to look at, because there's these different glutamine cycles within the body. Am I getting too mechanistic? Is this okay?
Okay. Just relax, man. Do your thing.
All right. So basically, like, for your body to create GABA, which is what allows the brain to create GABA to actually be able to calm down. Believe it or not, you need glutamine. You need glutamate first, right? So glutamate is the excitatory neurotransmitter that's making you anxious. Like, if you think anxious isn't the word, but if you think like what MSG does to you, like if you have MSG, it makes things taste good. It makes your brain feel really good when you eat Chinese food, things like that, right? Okay, well, that's because you have a big surge of glutamate. You actually need glutamate to be able to make GABA, which sounds counterintuitive, but it's the way that it is. And glutamine feeds that cycle. If you're getting enough protein in, you're getting enough meat in, you're probably sufficiently getting glutamine. The problem is at the moment that training intensity increases or stress increases, you deplete your glutamine stores really fast. So glutamine has been something that's helped my immune system tremendously, because I do a lot of long distance work. So when I'm like increasing my running, anything above your net neutral, your normal, you start taking a hit there. Can degrade your gut lining. It can do all kinds of things. So glutamine helps kind of restore the gut. It helps provide you with enough glutamine to restore that glutamate to GABA cycle. So it has a long-winded way of saying it has a profound effect on helping you feel calmer.
Got it. I love it. And I think that's great. And I like bringing in some of the mechanism piece as well. It sounds like either glutamate or a lot of Chinese food, either one will kind of do the job. So I want to close up here. This has been fantastic, but I want to know, what are your top 3 non-negotiable supplements that you personally rely on, and what's that one supplement flying under the radar that you wish more people understood going into the new year?
Cool. Good question. Dimagnesium malate. So just that's basically just a more sustained release magnesium. It's a stretch to say I can't live without it, but I certainly can't go to the bathroom without it. So, so it pretty much is necessary. So I mean, that thing, I just am stocked up on it all the time. I would also say, wow, I mean, I'd almost say glycine at this point, or at least magnesium glycinate. Like it's made such a difference in like my nocturia, not having to pee at night. So I sleep through the night a lot more. So it's a really, really profound one for me. I would say, man, there's a lot that I really, really like, but I'd still say a good quality like EPA DHA. Like,
okay, nice. That's great.
I think it's a big one for me. Like, I really feel the brain is
radar, so I think that makes sense.
Yeah, it's definitely. I used to megadose it. I certainly don't megadose it anymore. I think there's a lot of evidence that there's a lot more like almost too much cell fluidity that can kind of happen there, membrane fluidity. So like 500 to 1,000 milligrams, like nothing crazy, but I feel noticeably different without it. So that's really my litmus test. And then the one that's flying under the radar, one that we talked about before we started recording, which should be beta-alanine. I think beta-alanine as like a neuroprotectant, not as a pre-workout, something that you can take daily from like 2 to 5 grams and get a cumulative effect that has a major effect on protecting like microglial cells in the brain, like sort of the immune system of the brain. So I think long-term, just for potentially staving off neurodegenerative conditions, it's a really important one.
Awesome. This has been awesome. Thomas DeLauer, thank you for joining Science Corner. It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Cool. Thanks, man.